Can you tell me your name? Jesse? Okay, how old are you? 4.
The girl you see here is 9 years old Jessica Lunsford, living a carefree life like any other child. But everything changed on February 24th, 2005. That evening, her father left her with her grandparents, unaware that this ordinary night would soon become their worst nightmare. The next morning, when he went to wake her for school, he made a horrifying discovery. Jessica was gone. She had disappeared without a trace from her own bedroom.
I just was speechless over it all. I was numb.
Police rushed to the Lunsford home and combed through the scene, but there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. With each passing hour, the hope of finding Jessica alive faded. Now, all hope rested on law enforcement and any potential witnesses.
Wake up, America. The next child could be yours.
"45 miles north of Tampa lies the laid-back village of Homosassa, a peaceful retreat where people can escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The slow pace of this small town is a stark contrast to the rhythm of big cities, making it feel as if time itself moves differently here. In 2004, single father Mark Lunsford decided to move in with his parents, believing it was the perfect place to raise his 9-year-old daughter. From the moment she was born, Jessica Lunsford was a sweet and kind-hearted child. Within the family, she was lovingly known as Jessie.
I took care of her from the time she was born. I wouldn't have traded Jessie for a pot of gold. She was my pot of gold. I can't explain how deep I felt towards Jessie, and Jessie felt the same way. And her with her daddy, they were inseparable.
Cheerful and full of life, Jessie quickly adapted to her new surroundings. Every Wednesday, she attended a church youth group where she made great friends. But above all, nothing made her happier than spending time with her father. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, just like any other for the Lunsford family. After returning home from church, Jessie spent time with her father and grandparents before heading to bed around 10 p.m.
And she'd say, "Grandma, I'm ready to go to bed." And so I'd go in there with her to put her to bed.
About half an hour later, her father, Mark, left to visit his girlfriend, who lived just 3 miles away. That night, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but by morning, the Lunsfords' lives would be changed forever. When Mark Lunsford returned home the next morning, he immediately knew something was wrong.
I reached up and stuck my key in the door. I go into the house and her alarm is going off. So I opened her door and I went in her room and she wasn't there, and I got a big lump in my throat, and I woke my parents up. I thought maybe she was in bed with them.
He asked his parents where his daughter was, and they told him they last saw her sleeping in her room. Realizing Jessie was missing, the family didn't waste any time and immediately called the police.
Emergency? Yes, we got a child missing. How old's the child? 9. She's 9 years old? Yeah.
Jessie's family was certain she wouldn't have run away. They had a strong, loving bond, and she had no reason to leave. While the police were on their way to the Lunsford home, Mark was already doing everything he could to find his daughter.
You know, you're hoping to God that she's just playing and hiding from you. But when you're outside screaming for her, trying to understand what could have possibly happened to her, where she just didn't vanish.
Officers combed through the house looking for any signs of evidence, but there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle in Jessie's room. Her school clothes were still neatly placed exactly where she had left them.
I didn't see any footprints around the residence. I did not notice any pry marks. I did not notice any signs of struggle, even when I searched the girl's room.
The room appeared untouched, except for one thing: her beloved toy dolphin, a gift from Mark that he had won for her at a fair, was missing. No one could believe that such a young girl could wake up in the middle of the night and simply leave. It quickly became clear that this was not a typical case. Knowing that time was critical, the local police immediately contacted the FBI for assistance. They had recently solved another case of a missing child with a happy ending, and everyone hoped for a similar outcome in this situation. Jessica was last seen around 10 p.m. when she went to her room for bed. Her family recalled that the house had been quiet that night. No unusual noises, no disturbances. Even their dog, who would typically bark at strangers, remained silent, making it unlikely that an intruder had forced their way in.
The only thing that was out of place was on the pillowcase. And it wasn't this, it was probably a half of my fingernail. It was a speck of dirt, which was the only thing out of place in the whole bedroom.
With no signs of struggle, a far more unsettling possibility emerged. Jessie may have left willingly with someone she knew, and that was the most terrifying thought of all. Statistically, most crimes are committed by people the victim knows. The FBI swiftly arrived and launched a large-scale search operation. Their top priority was to eliminate anyone Jessie might have trusted from their list of suspects. In missing person cases, the investigation always begins at the last known location, in this instance, her home. To coordinate their efforts and monitor potential suspects, including the Lunsford family, the FBI established a mobile command center on site. Detectives were facing an incredibly challenging case, and no one was above suspicion, regardless of their relationship with the victim. Everyone remained a potential suspect until proven otherwise. As investigators continued searching for answers, news broke that a body had been found in a lake 75 miles away. Mark Lunsford rushed to identify it, but with great relief, he confirmed it was not Jessie.
We have confirmed that it is not our girl. I repeat, it is not our girl.
Hope was restored. Without wasting a moment, law enforcement expanded their search and rescue efforts throughout the area. A second team of investigators took a deep dive into the backgrounds of the primary suspects, starting with Jessie's father, Mark Lunsford. However, he had a solid alibi. He had spent the entire night with his girlfriend, who confirmed his whereabouts. When he returned home at 5:45 a.m., Jessie was already missing. Detectives are skilled at uncovering hidden truths, and with their access to extensive records, they left no stone unturned. During their investigation, they learned that years earlier, Mark had been accused of inappropriate behavior toward his ex-wife. Although the charges had been dropped, this detail caught the investigators' attention. Determined to clear his name once and for all, Mark voluntarily agreed to take a polygraph test.
The heart of the test is either going to be, did you take the child or do you know where the child is now? One of the readings we get is galvanic skin response, which is sweat activity on the skin. He had virtually no response, which was a unique physical characteristic for an individual.
Although there were no clear signs of deception, the test results couldn't be considered entirely reliable. Next, investigators turned their attention to Jessie's grandfather, Archie Lunsford. As he had been home when she disappeared, he became a key person of interest and was subjected to a rigorous 6-hour interrogation.
Are you sure that you didn't do something to Jessie that you're ashamed of? Don't you feel like you ought to tell us about it? And this goes on over and over and over, and I couldn't take it anymore.
Despite the pressure, Archie never wavered from his story.
Because it never did happen.
He claimed that on the night Jessie vanished, he left his bedroom only once to let the dog out. Though he maintained his innocence, at one point, Archie cracked and confessed to a long-buried secret.
Archie had been arrested some years back in reference to the assault of a young lady.
I have got a temper.
The incident from 50 years ago raised concerns for the investigators. Although the charges had been dropped, the agents felt they were onto something and chose to pursue their investigation in that direction. The police noticed that Archie didn't seem particularly distressed by the situation, which led them to take more drastic measures. The sheriff lied to Mark Lunsford, telling him that they had found Jessica's blood on her grandfather's underwear.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to elicit responses and reactions out of them to find out if there is something that we're not being told.
In that moment, Mark was filled with rage. He understood that the police were trying to make him question his father's innocence.
They want me to ask you if you know where Jessie's at. I'm sorry, Dad. I mean, you'll promise me. No, just forgive me. I have to ask you.
Despite the intense pressure, Archie Lunsford stuck to his story, continuing to deny any involvement in his granddaughter's disappearance.
That's all I keep telling him. I just want to find Jessie.
It really broke my heart to think that they had broke him down to where he would even think that his father would do something to harm that child. And that hurt. That really hurt.
Still, even with these harsh tactics, the police's only aim was to get to the truth. Hoping to clear his name and put all doubts to rest, Jesse's grandfather agreed to take a polygraph test. However, much like his son Mark, Archie Lunsford displayed almost no physical reaction, making the results inconclusive. With no solid evidence against them, the FBI shifted their focus. They turned their attention to another possibility: cases where divorced parents abduct their own children. Mark Lunsford had sole custody of his daughter after his wife left them 8 years earlier. From that moment on, Jesse's grandmother took on the role of a mother figure. However, this shift didn't significantly affect Jesse's life since. Even when she had a traditional family structure, it was her grandmother who spent the most time with her. Investigators considered the possibility that Jesse's mother might have decided to take her back. Mark Lunsford had lost touch with his ex-wife years ago, and her last known address was in Ohio. As detectives made their way there to question her, the Lunsford home became a focal point for the community's growing concern. By midday, crowds of local residents had gathered outside, desperate to help in the search for Jesse. With each passing minute, more volunteer search teams arrived.
Move down just another couple steps each.
They turned over every rock, determined to find any trace of the missing girl, knowing that time was working against them. Meanwhile, FBI agents located Jesse's mother in Cincinnati. She insisted she hadn't seen her daughter in years and provided a rock-solid alibi.
We've got receipts, we've got work records, we've got time in, time out. We could show that she by herself was not down here.
24 hours had passed since Jessica Lunsford vanished from her bedroom, and no one could explain how she could have disappeared without a trace. Suspicion turned back to her mother when a report emerged claiming that Jessica had been seen in Ohio, just miles from her mother's last known residence. The lead came from a retired law enforcement officer, and for a brief moment, everyone held their breath. The witness reported seeing a girl who looked like Jessica with a suspicious man driving a car with Florida plates. The FBI wasted no time tracking down the vehicle and discovered a girl inside who closely resembled Jessica, but it wasn't her. With every false lead, frustration and desperation mounted. Investigators decided it was time to widen the circle of potential suspects. Detectives began checking the alibis of Jessica's friends, teachers, and even members of her church.
He asked me many questions and other people at the church and our pastor, and they questioned everybody. Well, they wanted to find her as much as we wanted to find her.
Everyone who knew Jessie was just as eager to find her as the police, and without exception, they all cooperated fully with the investigation. However, despite their efforts, no new leads surfaced. The agents kept revisiting the missing girl's bedroom, hoping to find something they might have missed before. Then, finally, their persistence paid off. They discovered a torn mosquito net in the hallway.
That is what I refer to as a burglar cut, where they cut an L-shaped screen and put their hands through the screen and unlock the door on the inside.
The door hadn't been opened because it was secured with a broom handle. This discovery gave detectives a new lead and expanded their list of potential suspects.
I went to our crime analysis unit. I asked them to pull up every known burglar suspect in that area.
The Citrus County Sheriff brought in special search dogs to help track the girl's scent, but each time the dogs got close to the road, they lost the trail. This suggested that the child might have been taken away in a vehicle. As a result, investigators shifted their focus to another potential lead: registered offenders convicted for harassment-related crimes. In the area around the Lunsford family's home, there were about 50 such individuals. The police began interviewing people within a half-mile radius, gradually widening their search. For the investigators, finding Jessie became the primary reason for going to work every day, and they approached her disappearance as if it were their own child who had gone missing. With the FBI's permission, Jessica's father dedicated himself to keeping his daughter's disappearance in the public eye. He put up flyers with her description and did everything possible to ensure that as many people as possible were aware of her case. Eventually, this publicity paid off. After several days without any significant leads in the search for 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford, the FBI finally received a lead. A man was seen in a local supermarket with a girl who matched Jessica's description. However, when Mark Lunsford reviewed the security footage, he noticed that the unfamiliar girl picked up a package of fried onion rings, something his daughter would never have eaten. At that moment, Mark realized that the girl wasn't his daughter.
It was like, oh my God, this is wonderful, and then everything went back to hell.
In an instant, all his hopes were crushed once more.
I just ask everybody to look. That's really what I can ask for, look.
The police decided to suspend the search for the missing girl and concentrate on the suspect instead. Detectives began questioning everyone on the list of former criminals, and eventually, they tracked down the whereabouts of everyone except for one man, John Cooey. However, he no longer lived at his previous address.
John Cooey's home was empty when we got there. There was nothing there. There was no forwarding address. He was a vagabond. He would just bounce around.
Then, one of the detectives remembered that he knew Cooey's sister, having arrested her in the past. In an unexpected turn of events, he discovered that her house was directly across from the Lunsford family's home. According to his sister, she had moved out and now her brother, John Cooey, was living in her house. The fact that a convicted criminal was living just a few steps away from where Jessica had disappeared raised serious concerns. When agents arrived at the house, they discovered that he was gone. Neighbors said he had suddenly left for Savannah, Georgia, only a few days after the girl went missing. The police had searched all the houses in the area, but for some reason, no one had thought to ask about the person living directly across the street. Throughout the investigation, John Cooey hadn't raised any alarms with law enforcement. It seemed he only left his house late at night to avoid drawing attention, and he managed to do just that.
And I had no idea that there was a person in the neighborhood like that. I had no idea, neither did anybody else.
You're looking right at it every morning. As soon as you go in the living room, you look out the front room, living room, there's that trailer, right there.
Although there was no direct link between John Cooey and the disappearance of 9-year-old Jessie, his criminal history raised concerns among the authorities. He had been convicted of a crime strikingly similar to Jessica's case. Cooey had been arrested for breaking and entering. His crime involved entering a house, going into a young girl's bedroom, and covering her mouth with his hand and trying to kiss her. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was released after just 2. Investigators felt they were getting closer to solving the case when they learned that John Cooey had gotten off a bus in Savannah a few days earlier, though they still didn't know his exact location. The FBI notified the Georgia police to stay alert and keep track of him. Eventually, their efforts were rewarded. John Cooey was spotted. The man came to the police station voluntarily, but it was clear from the conversation that he was nervous. Cooey denied any involvement with the missing girl, insisting he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Aware that the police didn't have a warrant for his arrest, he answered all their questions and then demanded to be released immediately. To verify his innocence, investigators convinced Cooey's sister to let them search her old house. In the bedroom, they found a mattress stained with blood, but they couldn't determine whose blood it was. This discovery only increased suspicion around Cooey, but by the time he left the station, he had already managed to leave town, heading in an unknown direction. The county sheriff then released Cooey's photo and name to the national media.
I'm saying John Cooey's a person of interest. I want to either rule him in or rule him out, and I got to find him.
The following morning, a witness saw Cooey at a bus stop in Augusta, Georgia, and quickly informed the authorities about his location. He was arrested shortly after. Following a long interrogation, the police initially believed he might not be involved in the girl's disappearance and were even prepared to return to Florida. However, before they left, investigators asked Cooey to take a polygraph test, which he agreed to willingly. FBI agents spent 2 hours examining his statements, and ultimately, under intense pressure, Cooey eventually broke down and confessed.
Of course, your heart drops into your stomach. I had to concentrate on keeping my composure in front of him. You know, I had to concentrate on doing my job right.
Cooey admitted that he had been watching Jessica play in the yard a few days before her abduction. On the night of February 25th, Under the influence of illegal substances, he broke into the Lunsford home through the back door. He walked through the house to Jessica's room and told her he was taking her to her father.
We believe that when he got her out of the bed, his glove did glance the pillow of where Jessica slept and left a mark.
He then led her across the street to his sister's house where he essayed her.
She asked if she could go home, and he promised that she would go home if she would step in these bags, which she did. He then tied those bags around her, put her over his shoulder, carried her out the door to a grave, put her in that grave, buried her, and then stood on it as she tried to stand up.
With his confession, investigators were finally able to uncover the truth about where Jessica Lunsford had been all this time.
2 cop callers come flying down the road. They immediately jumped out of their vehicles and taped off that house, the whole yard, the whole big area. And at that moment, I knew where my little girl was.
Cooey directed them to a spot just beside the back steps, only 150 yards from Jessica's bedroom window. She was found in a shallow grave, about 4 feet deep, kneeling. Wrapped in 2 garbage bags, her hands were bound in front of her as if she were prepared for prayer. She was clutching her beloved stuffed dolphin. Jessica had been buried for 2.5 weeks. John Cooey, a cruel monster, was so heartless that he had the nerve to bury her alive. Everyone had hoped for a better outcome for the little girl, but tragically, that was not meant to be. The medical examiner confirmed that 9-year-old Jessie was likely alive for just a few hours after leaving her bedroom. Investigators believe that the dirt on the criminal's gloves, which left a trace on the pillow, indicated that Cooey had already dug the grave before entering the Lunsford home. By the time Jessica was reported missing, she had already been buried. The responsibility for seeking justice for Jessica now rested with the state prosecutor. He described it as one of those cases where you are driven to do everything in your power to ensure the perpetrator faces the harshest possible punishment. The jury unanimously found John Cooey guilty in the Jessica Lunsford case, resulting in him receiving the maximum sentence.
That was the biggest relief I had during all of it, was the day that they said, you're going to be put to death. Plain as you can be. And I thought, yes.
John Cooey passed away in prison 2 years after the verdict due to health complications. The heartbreaking fate of 9-year-old Jessica had a profound and a lasting effect on everyone involved in her search.
I'm glad that God let us have her for what time that we did. I'm glad that she had such a good relationship with her daddy. But she's at rest right now. She knows no harm. There was a band of angels that came and gathered around Jessie and took her home. She didn't know any of that pain. That is what I've always believed.